My guest is Andrew Basiago, and I think I'm saying his name right. Andy, are you there?
I certainly am, Carrie, and you got my name perfectly.
Awesome. I know it rhymes with Chicago, so that's how I remember
Yes.
say your name. Anyway, and Andy, actually, we have known each other for quite some time now. You were actually interviewed by us on our sort of infamous TV show that has never made it to the air. And maybe someday will. I just, True TV is just holding on to that thing for some reason. I guess we scared the living daylights out of them, whatever. But, and so you have quite the saga. I'm trying to think about how to introduce you. You're a lawyer, among other things, and in some ways you as a young man, even maybe you would consider yourself a boy, when you first got involved in what is this thing called Project Pegasus, which was basically a black project that involved time travel, and you went through sort of what we think of as the jump room, but what you think of maybe is a little bit different technology, I'm not sure, to Mars and back more than once, if I understand it correctly. And then, since then you've come forward to reveal some of this information to the public. And I am going to be very interested to find out if you've got new information since we had last talked about all of this. But certainly to start off with, you need to fill in the blanks, introduce yourself, and give a little background. And then if we can sort of describe the story. I know it's been out there to a lot of the people who will listen to this, but nonetheless, maybe you can cover it briefly.
Well, I was brought into the emergent U.S. time-space program, which was identified to the children involved as Project Pegasus, which was under DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, informally by my father at age 6, which is the first time that I jumped through the sort of double parentheses-shaped teleporter that was at the old Curtiss Wright Aeronautical Company facility in Woodridge, New Jersey. That's actually where one of Tesla's schematics had been set up, and they accidentally realized it was a teleporter when one of their technicians walked through the energy that the two booms was basically radiating and ended up in Africa. And I was first taken up there by my father sometime between September of 1967 and September of 1968, because when we met with Dr. Harold M. Agnew at the Los Alamos Labs for my father to present the prospectus to involve U.S. civilians, including children, in the testing and training that was underway into these essentially time travel technologies, Dr. Agnew asked my father how old I was, and we both answered 6. So because I was born in September of 61, that had to have taken place between those two sort of, chronological field goalposts, as it were. So that demonstrates that physical teleportation of human beings through vortal tunnels in time-space, that this particular device that Tesla left at his death in 1943 was fully operational within the defense technical community of the United States by no later than September of 1967. And then I was officially brought into Project Pegasus, which was essentially using us as participant observers, as chrononauts, and as future time travel trainees, so to speak. In the fall of 1969, as a third grader, when I was age 7 going on age 8, several months after the lunar landing. And it was in that context, during the years, fall of 1969 to the end of the summer of 72, that I was exposed to a variety of different time travel methodologies, spanning the spectrum from conventional remote viewing to physical teleportation to future events, and also I was chronovised to the distant past in different contexts in New Jersey and in New Mexico. Another interesting thing that kind of worked during those years is at the beginning of the summers of 1970, 71, and 72, we jumped to New Mexico. Well, certainly we were teleporting back and forth in summer of 70, but in the beginnings of the summers of 71, the beginning of summer of 73 accessed from fall of 71. And then in the beginning of the summer of 72, I teleported to New Mexico and spent the entire summer there involved in project activities. And when we jumped back from Sandia back to the tarmac at Curtis Wright at the end of the summer we had just experienced, we were basically put back in time to the beginning of the summer and experienced a new summer, a second summer in New Jersey. So I essentially had 4 years of experience in time travel sort of sandwiched into those 3 years. And then I was summarily dismissed from the program, as were all of the other children. That was just the way those black projects are set up. At a certain point, they utilized you for what they wanted, and you get your tickets punched, so to speak, and you're dismissed from the project. And I had a relatively we moved from New Jersey to Southern California in November of 72. I had a fairly conventional junior high and high school and first year of college in Southern California. And then in the middle of the summer of 1980, I was brought back within the secret government research and development realm again when my father brought me into the CIA's jump room program. I was trained in the Mount Shasta region. And then while I was attending UCLA from 1981 to 83, that period of my undergraduate years at UCLA, I was regularly driving over to Santa Monica, picking up some data, and then driving over to 999 North Sepulveda in El Segundo, California, where I was taking the jump room to Mars. And I think that's in fact what we discussed for your program, Shadow Operations, was the jump room there in El Segundo. So I've been investigating my experiences in childhood and then as a late teenager, young adult for 12 years now. And really, at this point, my campaign, my truth campaign to go back and research what happened and then share it with others and bring other participants forward is prevailing. For example, we now have 2 participants in the jump room part of the program that have come forward. One has come forward, one will soon come forward to validate my claims and describe their experiences in the program. So, my effort to disclose this information so that others would come forward and share it with the American people is in fact succeeding. So actually, I'm optimistic that the truth is not only getting out, but that it's being affirmed by other participants, and no longer will this story simply hang on my own account, but that several other individuals have now come forward to describe their involvement. I think that there will probably be more that will be coming forward.
Okay, well, thank you for that. That's a good summary, and I guess what I would like to do is separate some of this out and maybe go down some of the different roads that you introduced here. But first of all, I'd kind of like to talk about how this information has been received over the last few years and what the current climate is that you're experiencing in regard to your information.
Well, there will always be people who are down on what they're not up on, but I think that I'm prevailing at making the case for the existence of the U.S. time-space program, both embodied in Project Pegasus and in the Mars Jump Room program. For example, after my second appearance on Coast to Coast AM, in an Insta poll performed by Coast, I grabbed 65% of the audience. 65% of listeners believe me that the U.S. was researching and developing time travel in the late 60s and early 70s. 21% disbelieved me, and about 15% were undecided. So I got more yes votes for the historical existence of Project Pegasus than, let's say, the voters of New York and California cast for the governors of those very large states, for Governor Cuomo and for Governor Brown. So I think we've got about 51%. So I essentially grabbed a supermajority. Now, one could say that the Coast audience is predisposed towards parascience and the paranormal, parapolitical claims, but at the same time, it's a very intelligent, sort of aggressive audience. It's an audience that does its own thinking. And so I think that's a marker of the fact that by strictly adhering to the facts of my experiences and, for example, acknowledging when I don't know something and just being as clear and truthful as possible, I think that I've overcome the widespread disbelief in society for claims that are so sweeping and unusual. And I'm really heartened that the majority of people believe my account because, in fact, it's a true account. And it's an account that I've shared at great potential risk to myself, my career, my personal and professional reputation. So there'll always be negativists, but the problem is nobody can negate the positive experience of another person because they haven't lived their life. And so I'm actually practicing a principle of non-judgment regarding other people's non-ordinary claims because I have a very non-ordinary story to share. But I think the majority of people who have heard the whole story believe it because it's a true story. And I think they can hear the ring of truth in my voice, and they can realize that as a practicing lawyer, I have no reason to purport a false story about government activities. And I've relied on actually a form of legal argument known basically as inundation, the inundative argument, which is where you share so many facts, so much evidence, in this case not with the jury but with the court of public opinion, that the fact finders simply have no choice but to believe you because there's no way that you could marshal so many esoteric facts in a way in which you show the interlinkage between, for example, the people, the places, the time travel technologies, the experiences, and then also share in that context your own personal experiences and responses to them. So I think people can see that I'm not making this up. I think if I was making it up, I would be, a creative writing genius, more advanced than Ray Bradbury and writers like him. I mean, I simply, I must admit that I don't have the imagination to have made this up. All of my writing has been in the area of general interest nonfiction. I view myself as a servant of reality, and I'm not embellishing. In fact, I've held back a lot. I've only told about 10% of the story, just the major high points involving the technologies, for example, and some of the people who were involved.
Okay, but why would you be holding back?
Well, just because I'm writing a book, and I don't want to get involved in such minutia that people miss the high points. So I'm not holding back critical information, but I've hit the high points regarding the people, the places, the technologies, and the time travel experiences, so that people understand that by 1970 the U.S. government was involved and had developed an array of time travel technology. The two major ones being the Tesla teleporter and the chronovisor technology that was pioneered by Father Ernetti and Gemelli, working with Enrico Fermi in Italy. Those were the two major technologies that we were being trained in as well. So I've sort of shared the chapter headings, the gemstone file to my experiences, but I haven't gone into all the the more personal experiences that will be in my book.
Okay, so at this moment, in terms of your experience as a boy, initially when you came forward, which was several years ago now, it seemed that your recall was not the way it is at this time. Can you describe what process you went through to gain additional recall, so to speak? Right.
When I first started revisiting what happened in Project Pegasus around the year 2000, my memories of my childhood experiences weren't blocked. They were just memories of long standing. So, for example, after I was dismissed from the program at age 11 in 1972, I later discussed my experiences with some of my teachers in high school, for example, with my junior high and high school friends, with individuals in college, and I believe even in law school. I never really had those memories repressed. There was an attempt to brainwash me by an induction of pain coupled with a hypnotic sort of induction that I defeated as a child. In other words, I was never blocked regarding my experiences in Project Pegasus. And it was a matter of simply writing down what I was remembering and then investigating my memory by, for example, placing phone calls to the people I was remembering interacting with. I contacted a lot of the principals. I mean, I spoke to Dr. Agnew. I spoke to Dr. Lukasik, who was then the director of DARPA. I spoke to Joe Conason, one of my father's colleagues at the Ralph M. Parsons Company, which was the principal defense contractor involved. And after I told him that I was going to write a book about my experiences and maybe try to get a movie made based on the book, this is a direct quote. This is from a Ralph M. Parsons Company engineer who I remembered being on the project. He said, "A book, a movie, nobody on the outside knows about this stuff." Okay, so I was actively investigating my memories. I wasn't searching for the memories. And then as I began to compile all the information, I spent so much time on my childhood memories in Project Pegasus that I have the whole story now. So that part of my story does not hinge on retrieved memory, on recovered memory. But what I was blocked about was everything that happened from summer of 1980 forward regarding the jump room. When I entered the jump room program in 1980, I was no longer a child. I was 18 years old. And before leaving my 3 weeks of training at College of the Siskiyous in summer of 80, Brett Stillings and I, who's one of the other experiencers.
Okay, we're going to be interrupted by a break here. We'll be right back. At the moment, I am looking it through the chat. We have Andrew, just so you know, we have a chat room that goes on during the show, and the link is on the front page of Project Camelot. So you can go to projectcamelotportal.com or projectcamelot.org. Takes you to the same place. And if you scroll down to the radio show icon and announcement, you'll see there's a link there for the chat. Okay. That takes you to a chat room where people post questions during my radio shows, and I will be picking out questions. I actually have somebody who's helping me by posting the questions into the chat, into my Skype chat, so that I'll be able to grab the questions as we go from the audience. And then on top of that, we have a call-in number, and I'm going to give that out here. That is, let's see, 218-339-8525. I hope that's the right number. I think it is. 218-339-8525. And to double check that number, you can actually go to AmericanFreedomRadio.com. And obviously you have to go there anyway to listen to the show, so theoretically you're there. And they post the number on their website. So those are two ways in which people can ask you questions during the show. And hopefully we'll be able to be a little more warned next time we get the commercial. I'm sorry, that kind of snuck up on us there. So I have to say that I have a number of questions that have already come in, and so either we can, I forget if, I think I asked you a question and then you started to answer it, but did you finish your answer?
No, let me describe what happened. So I was investigating my childhood experiences in Pegasus in the first decade of this century, totally blocked about the jump room experiences because the brainwashing that was employed after our training in summer of 80, before we left the Shasta region, worked. And it was only as a result of Brett Stillings contacting me in February of 2010 that working together we've been able to piece together what happened. And so my truth campaign and my search for the truth has entered a second chapter in which we now have really extensive information about the jump room program. But for example, when I spoke with you and Bill in January of 2008, when I wrote my paper on the discovery of life on Mars in December of 2008 and then called you, you may recall that I telephoned you at that time, I was still blocked about the fact that I had been through these jump room experiences in the early 1980s. So there's kind of a layer in here where I brought forward the stuff from childhood, which reveals what happened and sort of the historical atmosphere in which time travel emerged secretly in the U.S. defense technical community. And then there's this second overlay that has only been pieced together recently regarding the jump room program and the people that were involved in it, some of whom have reached very powerful positions in our government, like the President of the United States, Barack Obama, and the individual he appointed, the first female and the 19th director of DARPA, namely Regina Dugan. That was a relatively distinguished group of young people my age. Another one of the jumpers was William Cameron McCool, who went on to join the astronaut program in 1996 and sadly died aboard the Columbia upon its re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere. So we're really talking about two stories here, and the second one has really just emerged since February of 2010 because Brett and I had the effect of triggering each other's memories, and we've pieced together much of what happened. What we were told in our training, and then what we experienced during the jump. So that's where, by 1980, 81, 82, 83, the United States government had trained us to take the jump room to Mars. Now, the third whistleblower, Bernie, is going to come forward, and he has a different theory of what we were accessing. He doesn't believe we were accessing Mars in real time. He believes that we were accessing sort of folds in time-space. Synthetic quantum environments, if you will, that were architected by the Greys. That either
that's very interesting. Yeah. That's completely possible, I suppose. Actually, I have a layer in regard to that because I'm told that the Mars, or even the base on Mars, and I was going to tell you about this, that you're talking about is actually in the fourth dimension. It's not in the third or the higher third as we are at this present time. And that's why when you went out on the surface of the Mars, it actually looks very desolate. But in reality, it doesn't look like that at all because it's on the fourth dimension. So you actually, going into Mars, you have to go through a gate that's on Mars to get to actually Mars in the fourth dimension. That is where the actual base exists. And so, I wanted to throw that out to you. That came from a whistleblower testimony.
That is very similar to sort of the disagreement that now exists between Bernie, Brett, and I. Bernie's saying, look, it was not Mars in real time. It may have been some recapitulation of Mars during an earlier epoch of its history, when, for example, there was enough oxygen for human beings to breathe, and it was the temperatures were in a temperate range where you could physically survive on the surface without encountering too much hot or too much cold. It may have been actually quantum engineered by the Greys as a synthetic environment, or it may have been elsewhere. Now, Bernie has stated that the astronauts are aware of these folds in time-space, and in fact call them slots, which was a very interesting revelation to us during.
I'm sorry, they call them what?
He states that these folds in time-space, that about 150 under the Earth, on the surface of the Earth, and outside the planet, not as far as Mars is, but going out, let's say, several hundred miles, are called slots, S-L-O-T-S, by the conventional astronauts. So we've learned in our interaction with Bernie that, members of the astronaut corps actually understood that we could visit the conventional near-Earth environment in rockets, but that the jump room was accessing micro-universes, if you will, sort of niches in time-space, where the Greys have stored certain environments. Because one of the threats to the validity of time travel claims is the second law of thermodynamics, which states that matter and energy in the universe seek maximum randomness, or basically chaos. And so, for example, the past doesn't exist because it's destroyed upon being created in the present, and the future doesn't exist either because you haven't had the collapse of the wave function where, an event actually is already manifest. But if past events could be stored in a solid-state system, for example, some kind of quantum niche that could be crafted in the time-space continuum, then there could be a recapitulation of a past environment on Earth or on another planet. And so that's Bernie's theory, which actually was Enrico Fermi's theory, of what the U.S. government was visiting when time travel emerged. Call it time.
Okay, but that doesn't actually, that's not the same as what I was saying. That is exactly, I appreciate what he's saying, and I think there could be shades of crossover, as you right. say, but actually it's not what the guy was telling me, because he was talking about the fourth dimension and current time. In other words.
What I was going to say was Brett is certainly adhering to the belief that it was Mars. I'm sort of trying to listen to everybody's accounts, and what you say could very well be the explanation, that the jump rooms were accessing environments in the fourth dimension. It was actually interdimensional transport. Now, but what we can say is this. that the individuals we've identified, when Bernie comes forward, he's going to acknowledge that the jump room program existed, that he can identify our instructor, which was Major Ed Dames, both there in Shasta and also he was present at El Segundo. I was in a briefing with Ed and with Bernie after a night run through the jump room, and that he can identify that Barry Soetoro, which was the name that President Obama was then using, his Indonesian name, and that Regina Dugan and he remembers being in the training and also going on jumps with, and I certainly remember Bernie, and Brett Stillings also remembers Bernie auditing at least a portion of our training program. So that Bernie's going to confirm that the program existed, that it was a secret U.S. space project, that it was one of the most important research and development projects in the history of the country because it was accessing new land. The jump rooms were literally giving access to theoretically new U.S. territory, if not on Mars, in time space, and that we had been trained for Mars, but that during our experiences in the early 80s there, a different theory of what we were accessing emerged, a different explanation. So I think that Bernie's going to be a key whistleblower here, because even if it's shown not to be Mars, it certainly establishes that the U.S. government was using quantum access to access environments either on the fourth dimension or that had been architected by higher beings in niches in the time-space continuum, which is a very, very provocative, very ultimately controversial conclusion. But that, in fact, is what Bernie is going to come forward and confirm. Bernie was the investigator of the jump room program for the intelligence community. He was detailed to the U.S. Air Force. But he was
could you, I'm sorry to interrupt here, but I actually would like to find out what do you mean by, could you relate to his title, his job description?
He states that he was serving as an assistant to the president and that it was within his ambit to join the program and resolve some of the discrepancies and some of the experiential mysteries that were emerging between those who were accessing Mars, as we were originally trained, or whatever that domain was, via the East Coast jump room and the West Coast jump room. There were two jump rooms. And he was placed in the project as a participant observer to then write a report about what was happening, what we were accessing, and the experiences of the jumper. So Bernie.
Okay, but where did you meet? How did you meet this man again?
Bernie, just as Brett Stillings did, Bernie contacted me after my third appearance on Coast. Brett contacted me after my first appearance, which was my November 11th, 2009 appearance. And then when I went on Coast the third time on November 10th of 2011 with Brett Stillings and Laura Eisenhower to talk about our experiences, Bernie contacted me, and I remembered who he was, and he also remembered the involvement of Barry, Regina, and I, both in our training and in our jump room experiences. So, this is a third participant, and he's only going to make our understanding of what happened, what the program was actually doing, more complex.
Okay. Now I've got several questions here, and I think you've more or less sort of covered my question, but the answer kind of jumped around, so... But maybe we'll get back to some of the details here. I've got a couple people asking a few things here. One, as a young boy, you were gone for 6 months. In the summer, did your mother notice that you grew during that time?
No. She didn't notice my absence because we were doubling back in time. We were basically on time loops that went out and then were brought back because we were brought back in time upon teleporting back to the East Coast. I entered kindergarten as a 4-year-old in September of 66 and then turned 5. So I was always on the medium to small size of my class. So by, let's say, the 6th grade, when I picked up those 9 extra months of elapsed time and aged biologically, by 6th and 7th grade, there was really no difference because I had been moved in terms of biological age from a child amongst my peers born in September of 61 to, let's say, one born in January of 61 who might have been, 9 months older but was still in the same grade. So there was no real appreciable noticeable difference because I had sort of started in my time travel experiences on the smaller side of my peer group, and I didn't. Yeah.
All right. I have. I'm going to jump to a question in regard to Ed Dames. He made very public the fact that he thought you were deluded, right?
No, I think he tried different ploys. He first tried to suggest that my memories and those of Brett could have come from a parallel reality type experience. That is in major part, not just in terms of what happened after we accessed the jump rooms, but we entered some kind of parallel reality where the jump rooms were, as it were. Then he began to disparage me as somebody who had been stalking him or contacting him frequently, when in fact I've only sent like 2 emails to him. Then he said, you're like all the other people who contact me with these crazy stories, but that's not true either because, I'm a lawyer educated at UCLA and Cambridge who spent 10 years on the case, now 12. So I'm not. This hasn't been a casual exercise with me. This has been my life's work.
Yeah.
And then he began. Then he got insulting and claimed that I had sick fantasies. And then he began swearing. And from our sources within Coast to Coast AM, his microphone was cut off because he'd begun cursing. So all I can say is we've said nothing disparaging about Major Dames. We admire him. Brett Stillings and I had already publicly stated that he was a great instructor and that we credit him with having the positive experience that we had in the jump room program. And we're sticking by our claims that he was our instructor at College of the Siskiyous in summer of 1980 because it's the truth. Talking
to Andy Basiago. There we go. About all of this, I have a caller from area code 208 who has actually been holding through the break, Andy, so would you mind if we take the call?
Not at all.
Okay. So, caller, let's see. Area code 208, you are on the line with Andy Basiago and Carrie Cassidy.
Hi. I just want to say that I admire what you're both doing, and I'll get right to my question. Andy, could you tell me more about the bismuth crystal? Do you remember any more details about the bismuth crystal that I think was on the transporter? And was that used in any of the other devices that you were involved with?
That's a very interesting question. It really goes to some of the time travel technology that I've I've revealed during my truth campaign. And that is, what the caller's referring to is the fact that I described how the crystal array that was generating the hologram in the chronovisors was made of the element bismuth, which is element 83. And the chronovisor was driving an electromagnetic signal through an 8-sided array of bismuth crystals to produce the hologram. And when I asked my father, who was clearly conversant in the technology, what it was doing and how it was doing that, he was saying that what was happening was that when electromagnetic energy a signal was placed through that 8-sided array, it created a field of supercharged particles that were so dense that they had a lensing effect whereby non-local events were being brought into the laboratory. So what the caller's referring to is a specific component within the chronovisors. I don't have any information that was what was generating the radiant energy between the 2 elliptical arms of the Tesla teleporter, but I can identify bismuth as the crystal that was being used essentially to produce chronovision, to produce non-local television, if you will. Basically a dense field of particles where you either were looking at a 2-dimensional array of, for example, a past event, or a cubical hologram in which a past or future event was being arrayed that you could either view if you were outside of the hologram or directly experience on a paraphysical basis if you were immersed in the hologram. So somebody's going to take that information and start tinkering with bismuth crystals and generate chronovision outside the context of the U.S. defense technical community, and at that point be certainly a person of interest to the national security state.
Okay, caller, does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, we have several other people asking questions here, and certainly I will say the call-in number again for people that do want to call in and speak via voice to Andy, 218-339-8525. So it's 218-339-8525, and that's the call-in number. Then on top of that, we have the chat room, as I've mentioned, and I have somebody who is very wonderfully helping me by grabbing questions for me so I don't have to fish around in there. And then I've also got a couple of people asking me questions on my Skype, the ones that are Skyping me here. So, and Andy, if at any time you want to say anything, that doesn't have to do with a question, but it hasn't been covered and you'd like to cover it, do tell me. All right?
Yeah, well, one of the things that I think hasn't really, I haven't given much attention to, but I think it's a critical fact, is I can establish through my father's 1978 resume, through his business cards, which were embossed with the Ralph M. Parsons logo, through the kinds of directories of personnel that Parsons kept, that are very similar to, for example, recall the fact that we identified Robert Lazar as having worked at the Los Alamos National Labs as a result of his name being listed in the employee directory. So I have that kind of evidence linking my father to Parsons. Well, what was the Ralph M. Parsons Company? Well, during World War II, Stephen Bechtel parlayed about a $100,000 investment into a $50 million fortune building Liberty ships for the U.S. Navy, which were critical to the success of the Allied war effort. His two lieutenants were Ralph M. Parsons and John Alexander McCone. So here we have the founders of the two leading engineering companies at the end of World War II and later, even to this day, and one of the most critical directors of Central Intelligence. John McCone was DCI from 1960 to 64. So, for example, he was the director of Central Intelligence during the period when President Kennedy was assassinated. I can't make that up. I can't go back and determine, who my father's engineering company employer was. That can be shown through physical evidence, not just the statements of his colleagues, but literally the surviving physical evidence of his employment there from 1966 to his retirement in 1984. Now, Parsons is one of the leading defense contractors in the world, certainly, to the United States government. For example, Parsons designed and implemented the MX missile program for the Department of Defense, the idea that we would place some of our intercontinental ballistic missiles on a train that would meander around the country to prevent being struck by, for example, a surprise bombardment of nuclear missiles from the former Soviet Union. So it's not a stretch for me to link Parsons to time travel, even though, let's say, if you visited their website, you might see a dam project that they're working on, or maybe a copper smelter in Chile, or maybe a city that they designed in Saudi Arabia, because most of Parsons' work, since it was founded shortly after World War II, has been secret defense projects for the U.S. government, and there has always been that CIA linkage, because Ralph M. Parsons' fellow lieutenant to Bechtel during the war, it was John McCone. And in fact, I met John McCone when I was serving on Project Pegasus. He was sitting at a table in Albuquerque discussing to my father and several other engineers from Parsons what this thing in the future called the Internet would be and how it would work. So I just want to emphasize that point, that Parsons isn't just some civil engineering company. It is one of the world's leading defense contractors, and it has always worked hand in glove with the CIA, because Parsons was working hand in glove with McCone when they were both serving as lieutenants to Stephen Bechtel during and after the war.
Okay, I'm really glad you brought that up. And then, it just, I don't know, it stumps me because of the Parsons last name. I understand, with Jack Parsons and JPL and the Pasadena connection, it just seems completely unlikely that they would both have the last name of Parsons and be so completely involved in, rockets and all of that.
I don't know the entire corporate history of the Ralph M. Parsons Company, but the individuals I was working with and 4 at Parsons when I was a child in Project Pegasus certainly were very conventional Americans. And I don't know of any tie between Ralph M. Parsons and his lieutenants at the Ralph M. Parsons Corporation and Jack Parsons' involvement with historical figures like L. Ron Hubbard and Lester Crowley and the so-called Babylon working.
Well, yeah, but you have to understand, if you don't know the history of Parsons, originally Jack Parsons was part of the whole Caltech JPL group that was investigating rockets, and doing groundbreaking research in that way before he got sort of, in a sense, sidetracked into the occult in a massive way. So that those early days, and it's really the last name. It's just one of those weird synchronicities that could even have, if you will, a time travel element to them. And I don't know if there's any, relationship other than the fact that if you have two people with a similar last name in the same area of the country, there could well be some kind of genetic link up there as well. So, I mean, I'm not saying there is. I'm not saying there is anything going on with that. I just don't know. I'm just saying the coincidence seems, mind-boggling to me.
It certainly is an interesting synchronicity. I think it's a very intelligent question to ask because of the same surname and the Pasadena connection and the connection to secret space projects for the U.S. government and so forth. But all I'm saying is I've never been able to establish that connection. I think it is actually just a coincidence.
Okay. So now we've got another caller, so I will take that call if you don't mind.
Have at it. Fire away, Carrie.
Okay, well, they're coming at you, but here we go. Area code 856, and this is Jared. This is Carrie Cassidy, Andrew.
Hey, Andrew. It's Jared. We met
about time travel, and we were just talking about the Parsons Company and other things I'm just laughing because actually someone was just commenting on the song that we just heard. Yes, I agree. It's a great song. At any rate, so Andy, I guess we should go to this caller who has been holding through the break, which is Jared, and see what he has to say. He's been very patient.
Sure.
So just 1 second here. Go ahead, Jared.
Hi. Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the question. I heard the last Coast to Coast, and with Ed Baines, to me, it almost seemed like he was admitting it, like the way he said it could have been in a different dimension. I mean, that's pretty out there itself, and then to be defensive. But besides that, I was wondering, in your, I guess, time in the secret government or whatever, was there any religious connotations, like talking about Jack Parsons or the Parsons connection? I was just wondering if you noticed any, like, satanic or otherwise, like, thing, and
Yeah, Jared, I remember you actually from Philadelphia, from the Free Your Mind.
Yeah, it's a great time.
I have to say absolutely not, but let me qualify that. Project Pegasus was an intelligence gathering program for the CIA. So between doing conventional remote viewing all the way to doing advanced time travel via Stargate, for example, they were sending me forward to 2045 to retrieve microfilm summaries of intervening events. There were a few forays into the occult. For example, there was one episode in which I was subjected to past life regression, and I saw myself living the life of a geometry professor during and shortly after the founding of one of the original New England colleges. So I'm actually investigating the history of Amherst and Yale and so forth, Bowdoin College, to determine if I can identify who that geometry professor I was. And of course, when they were spinning us to induce out-of-body experiences, that's an ancient occult practice. And in fact, the spiral image that's used to facilitate going out of body when you're being physically spun at the Masonic number of 33 rotations per minute clockwise has been found, for example, on a figurine from the 8th century BC in Persia. So some of the some of the more human forms of quantum access that we were involved in, for example, accessing our past lives, going out of body to explore the matrix and fourth dimensionality, as it were occult practices. But I was involved with a very ordinary group of people. For example, my father was a devout Roman Catholic, and so there wasn't, and I'm sure there were similar profiles to essentially the World War II generation that was running this program. So no, there was no overlay of Satanism or other sort of esoteric or anti-Christian belief systems. That's simply not what we were doing. It was a very structured program like the space program. So, and let me just add that we haven't established any connection between Ralph M. Parsons, the founder of the principal process engineering firm that facilitated the emergence of time-space exploration on behalf of the U.S. Defense Department, and Jack Parsons, who was the founder of the Jet Propulsion Lab, who personally then got involved in Satanism with Hubbard and Crowley. So there was really no evidence of the occult beyond some of these methodologies for accessing non-ordinary states, but there wasn't any overlay of any kind of dark belief systems at all. It was a very wholesome program, and we were being treated as the children that we were. You know, we were
okay. Well, actually, I mean, Jared, does that handle your question? Because I do want to address that from a different point of view. Hello? Jared? I think we lost him. Anyway. Okay. Well, at any rate, Andy, can you hear me?
Yes, certainly.
Okay, great. I just didn't know if I was off the air suddenly or what was going on. So what I want to say about that, though, is, you are aware, however, of the Montauk Project, right?
I've read the accounts of Project Montauk, and we were accessing moments in our subjective future via the Montauk chair. And yes, I'm familiar with that literature. I think it's somewhat of a jaundiced and a limited telling of what the U.S. time-space program was at the time of its emergence. So I'm trying to qualify as much as possible my experiences in Project Pegasus with the experiences of others in Project Montauk.
Yeah, I appreciate that. But the thing is that there is a correlation here because, I know Peter Moon and have known him for years and got involved in have read those books and gotten involved in investigating that to some degree as well. And I have to say that there is a crossover. And this is where you may not also know that there is a relationship, a very direct relationship between any time travel program that the Black Projects were involved in and the Montauk Project and the occult, as a matter of fact, because the beginnings of the Montauk Project and some of the techniques used were occult techniques, as you were beginning to sort of say and allude to, but it wasn't a casual sort of relationship. It was quite purposeful, and it did involve things that had to do with orgone, the use of children. That wasn't an accident using children, as a matter of fact. Now, these may be parts of even your memories that you're not even aware of there are correlations to, and activating the chair through orgone and through linking up with the orgone of children. All of this is very much involved in the whole time travel scenario.
Well, I think that this is apples and oranges. What I'm saying is I can confirm certain elements of the Montauk literature that establish the historicity of Project Montauk. So I'm certainly not denying those accounts. For example, I took many trips to moments in my own subjective future in the chair that is identified as the Montauk chair in the Montauk accounts. Also, Carl Jack Pruitt, Lieutenant, U.S. Navy, born 1934, now residing in New Mexico, father of Glenn Pruitt, who died several years ago, who was one of my contemporaries in the project. I can identify as one of the team leaders on Pegasus, and then he apparently went on to serve as the research director for Project Montauk. At least he's identified as such by Nichols and Moon. What I'm saying is that the Montauk literature is steeped in more sort of paranormal information. For example, there's the account where they talk about a Sasquatch coming through the screen that had been coupled to the Montauk chair. What I'm saying is that clearly some ancient occultic practices had been used to shift our perspective where we could perform certain forms of quantum access, like they looked into one of our past lives, during this one instance of past life regression, clearly spinning children to dissociate them and have them literally have their consciousness leave their body to remote view outside of their bodies. Those are definitely ancient occult practices. So I don't want to give kind of an ecumenical, Pollyannish view of Project Pegasus. What I'm saying is, I was really saying just one thing, and that is I was dealing with professionals who were as conventional in their outlook as engineers attached to the conventional space program. This was a post-war, Cold War intelligence gathering project for the Central Intelligence Agency. It wasn't about the induction of children into Satanism and other sort of dark practices or traditions. There was very little of that. Most of what we were doing was in interfacing with specific time travel technologies and getting accustomed to how they worked and then being able to perceive what was going on and accurately remember and report back what we saw. So my experiences were more germane to, let's say, the programs that were involving children in espionage rather than that were exploiting them in belief systems and subcultures that might very well be viewed as kind of dark. It was a very
okay. Well, I appreciate that. I think that I would question that, to be honest with you, and I would say that it's quite possible that what you're remembering as a very seemingly buttoned down organization with the children kind of taking part on sort of an intellectual adventure that was sort of almost 1950s-ish kind of approach to things. I think that there was more going on behind the scenes, quite possibly, than maybe you realized in that regard. But I think we can agree to disagree at this moment and leave it at that, since neither of us can actually drill down at this time into that area. I just want to say that as a result of my investigations and knowledge of the Montauk Project, also having dealt with super soldiers and mind control, et cetera, all of this gets wrapped into this scenario, and it to separate it out is not as easy as you might think. All of the astronauts have huge psychological issues and problems and areas where huge blanks exist. And they were supposedly, part of a space program that you're describing as very so-called professional on the outside, and yet they are extremely troubled individuals and have even been mind controlled. I think Richard Hoagland would agree hands down on that matter. But let's move on because there are many questions coming.
Actually, because there's a kind of a misplacement of what I'm saying, and I think it goes to sort of the validity or the essence of what I experienced. Clearly, dealing with the high strangeness of the experiences was mind-bending. And clearly, there were some rudimentary forms of mind control used. For example, we selected an alternate name. So I was known as Michael inside Project Pegasus. And I've described how there was an induction of pain and a kind of hypnotic trance approach used after my experiences concluded. And I'm going to be describing in my book what was done to secure our consent, to make us participate and yet not talk about what the project was doing outside the project. Some things that were done that were clearly unethical and somewhat dark. So I don't want to give a kind of a Pollyannish treatment to it. But for me, dealing with the psychological ramifications of time travel was mind-bending in a major way. So I was dealing with post-war Defense Department employees who were involving me in some very strange activities simply involving time travel, but not some kind of cult of belief system, some anti-Christian belief system outside of conventional American belief. But it was extremely mind-bending, and clearly there were certain things that were undertaken to make us malleable, to have us participate, and then to have us not discuss what we were involved in. So it wasn't all some cheery kind of situation. I'm just saying that I was dealing with, Americans who reflected the philosophical parameters of their own generation, so to speak.
Okay, but even that description you have to appreciate who you're dealing with here. As Project Camelot, I would say that Americans never were the way in which you're describing them. That there has always been this underbelly of, whatever you want to call it. I mean, the fact of the matter is, with a country run by the Illuminati and basically Satanists for all intents and purposes, and anything so-called religious with the overtones of Satanism that involve the Vatican, et cetera, and the Catholic Church, there's absolutely unlimited, roads we could go down in that regard. But again, let me move on to other questions, and I appreciate that you've tried to address this with, not having that a Pollyanna overlay, and that's really, commendable on your part.
Actually, your work with certain informants to Project Camelot regarding the Vatican connection is something else I can corroborate. Some of the learning components, some of the curriculum in the photo learning that we were given as we were being prepared for time travel in the 1969-70 time frame, that special learning program called Galileo, I know were connected to the Vatican because some of them had a notation at the bottom of the screens, SIV, which we know is the Servizio Intelligentsia Vaticano, which is the Vatican intelligence service. And I don't think you and I have ever discussed that after you did your interview with Leo Zagami, that there was a Vatican connection to our training for the program, and there's also a Vatican connection to the U.S. time-space program because the Vatican was the patron of Ernetti and Gemelli at the Catholic University of Milan, where they developed chronovision. And in fact, my father stated that the Vatican often approached different world governments, including the United States, to launch secret research and development projects like the one we were on. So there was, in fact, a Vatican connection to Project Pegasus that I'm quite aware of, and I wanted to share that information with you.
Okay, well, thank you. Yeah, that's fascinating, and I'm sure that there's going to be more parallels come forward in all of this regard. And I guess when you write your book, is it coming out fairly soon, or is this?
I'm still working on it. I've pretty much been practicing law and doing a lot of interviews. I hope to take a break here in 2012 and complete it. Okay,
cool. All right, so at this moment, what I'm going to do is, like I said, we still have the caller line available, 218-339-8525. I'm going to ask you some questions that have come to me in the Skype so that I don't forget them. Now, I don't know if this one has been handled, but someone is saying, I think in a certain sense you have answered it, but maybe I'm not. Maybe you haven't answered it specifically. Do you remember Brett Stillings when he was in the program?
Oh,
absolutely. So I guess... Does that mean you remembered him? You seem to have remembered him, but I guess did you? I think maybe what they're saying is when you were in the program, do you remember seeing him in the program?
Oh yeah, Brett and I were introduced by our fathers at the campground.
Andy, do you want to talk about any of that you were just mentioning during the break, as far as the priests and that link up?
Yeah, I had been describing how the curriculum that we were studying regarding the history of science and of society from the year 1450, which was the time of the High Renaissance. That lesson plan being called Galileo, which we were studying on these speed learning or photo learning machines called tachistoscopes. Some of the slides in that into that lesson plan, into the history of society and scientific advancement and so forth, bore the initials SIV, which is the Vatican Intelligence Service, the Servizio Intelligentsia de Vaticano. I also mentioned when we went to break that in the immediate group of children that I was in the learning lab at my public elementary school in New Jersey as we were being trained for time travel, we were all Catholic kids who were going to Mass and taking communion and going to confession and also going to Sunday school. at a local Benedictine parish. And the Benedictines, of course, are the Black Friars. They're one of the orders of the Catholic Church that, like the Jesuits, has been implicated in intelligence activity, in banking scandals. There was the famous hanging at Blackfriars Bridge in London that was associated with the Vatican banking scandal. And also there's a connection, the Benedictine connection to time travel, in the sense that Fathers Ernetti and Gemelli developed the chronovisor with Vatican patronage at the Catholic University of Milan. And they, in fact, were OSB. They were of the Order of St. Benedict. So there was a specific Catholic connection to the program, which was, in fact, the Benedictine Order of Catholic priests.
Pegasus was a federal research project of the United States government under DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, that was the signal of an event on a non-local basis. So DARPA has been able for 4 decades now to capture images of what might have happened in Times Square or your bedroom 5 years ago, or what will happen there 5 years from now. And that kind of technology presents a much greater risk to human privacy than simply the loss of public anonymity that sophisticated real-time video surveillance will work. The chronovisor resulted from an accidental discovery. That's one of the amazing things about the provenance of that particular quantum access technology. 2 Vatican musicologists, Pellegrino Ernetti and Pier Maria Gemelli, were working at the Catholic University of Milan in the 1940s, studying the harmonic patterns in Gregorian chants. And they were developing a specialized microphone to split the signals of the voices in the Gregorian chants. And they made a modification to the microphone, and to their astonishment, something that Father Gemelli's father had said to him in childhood came through the microphone. And they realized that they had made literally a quantum discovery, basically the ability, the capacity to identify the signal of a past event at that time and amplify it and bring it into the laboratory. I think they tapped into the residual signal of all events, and even the incipient signal, the residual signal of past events and the incipient signal of future events as they exist in the quantum hologram. Because if there wasn't this kind of permanence to events, events wouldn't be able to happen. The signal would have nothing to ground on. It would just tumble through time-space as an unrooted event. So if we think of chaos theory and the fact that there's essentially a constant recapitulation of an event occurring at smaller and smaller levels of magnitude after the event occurs, they found a way to capture that signal and amplify it. I believe that they then partnered with the great Italian physicist Enrico Fermi. That's indicated in the literature. By 1952, Father Gemelli was claiming that as a result of working with Fermi, they had reduced this accidental discovery to a device, namely a device not unlike a rudimentary television set that possessed a flat screen upon which you could view initially past events occurring. Fermi is probably the father of time travel. I think he really played the role that's been attributed to a variety of researchers, including Nikola Tesla. Certainly John von Neumann's name appears in the Montauk literature, and even Werner von Braun is believed to have consulted some of these early time travel scientists. Well, if the chronovisor device is not being attuned, it essentially moves randomly through different points in time-space. In fact, as Father Ernetti said, every individual from birth to death traces an arc in the quantum hologram of light and sound. Everything that has happened, is happening now, or will happen is stored somewhere in the quantum hologram. The challenge is to find it and capture the signal of it and amplify it. And that, in fact, is what Project Pegasus achieved. Found that, in fact, when they were capturing these signals, some of them were from timelines that are not the timeline that we're on. And so they were tuning in events and realizing, well, wait a minute, these are alternate realities. I was brought in officially into Project Pegasus in the fall of 1969 as I was transitioning from age 7 to 8. I was September born, and that was the beginning of the 3rd grade for me. So I was one of the child participants. They were bringing gifted and talented students into these Cold War research programs. And the first image of a past event that I saw on a TV-like screen, it was more like a kinescope. It wasn't black and white. It was more shades of gray and green. Actually, it was crystal clear, and in fact, I could not only see what was going on, but I could hear what was going on. And the event was the signing of the U.S. Constitution in Philadelphia on September 17th of 1787. So by the early 1970s, now I saw that at a national security watch post in Flemington, New Jersey, where the technicians were retrieving and recording past events, filming them on 16-millimeter film stock, and basically storing them in canisters, and then forwarding them to somewhere else. I didn't see it as if looking through a window as it was occurring. I saw a hologram in which that event was recapitulated in dull colors and clearly in sound. I could see that some of the framers, I could hear when they moved their chair or coughed or got up and left the room. When I entered the program in the late 1960s, clearly the rudimentary chronovisor that Ernetti and Gemelli had developed had been evolved. I remember my late father, Raymond Basiago, who was one of the project principals, stated that the Vatican had approached the United States government about taking the technology further. So when I entered the program officially in the fall of 1969, the chronovisor had already been developed into a device that generates a hologram of a past or future event. And as it was explained to me, that was done by driving an electromagnetic signal through an octagonal, that is an 8-sided array of bismuth crystals. This produced a hologram of light particles so dense that the device had a lensing effect, whereby timelines that are adjacent to our own are brought into the laboratory. And so you had this cubical hologram being generated on a stage-like device with a crystal array in the ceiling. In fact, the crystal array is so bright that we went through a training exercise to avoid looking up at it, because if we did, we would be rendered blind. So this was an intense light that was being generated, and an extremely dense hologram. It produced an array and a depth of color that I've never seen in a motion picture, for example. Now, in front of the stage, there was a control panel, but what was most conspicuous was that there were 2 boom operators who were moving forward and back and also up and down, directing some form of particles across the hologram. In other words, they were operating booms that were emitting some kind of stream of particles by which they could fix the time and space coordinate of the hologram. These were devices that looked almost like studio television cameras. I couldn't see what they were directing at the hologram, but it was explained to me that they were emitting something that allowed them to generate not just a random concatenation of, let's say, images from different past events, but literally tune in the time-space coordinate of what the hologram was imaging, let's say the signing of the Constitution. So, for example, when those operators stepped down from their boom devices, the hologram just started randomly moving between alternate scenes, just basically a chaos of quickly changing scenes from different periods of time. So this goes to the sanctity, in fact, of our private lives. I'm alleging that DARPA has this technology. In fact, since the days of Project Pegasus, when they were generating holograms, it's probably been digitized into a turnkey surveillance system such as is depicted in the feature film Deja Vu. Because now we have computer technology to quickly bring up images, still photographs, and also moving images on our computer console. So then in the laboratory, when they were first experimenting with chronovision, they clearly wanted to generate holograms so that you could get a better look at what was going on. But if you stood inside the hologram, you actually experienced being in that past event. But yes, many of the things that I witnessed, in fact, many of the events that I visited inside the hologram were absolutely mundane moments in time. But those moments are sacred. They make up our lives, and I think that the American public deserves to know that this has been done with their tax dollars, and that the remote surveillance technology that DARPA has developed goes far beyond just filming people on the street and using a computer to go through and make sense of the images and determine who's a terrorist or whatever. It, in fact, involves the ability to invade the sanctity of everybody's past and future. If we look at the fact that really since 9/11, we've seen the emergence of a police state in this country, my concern is that because the U.S. government is secretly in possession of this technology, if we took an even further turn for the worse in terms of the government tyranny that we've seen, we would all find ourselves living in a 24-hour surveillance state. Criminal law enforcement, as was depicted in the film Minority Report. Would we actually develop a Bureau of Pre-Crimes if we knew someone was destined to commit a crime in the future? These are some of the philosophical complications. But I'm most concerned about the impact of this technology on our privacy. The technology does this absolutely non-locally and without any apparent signal in the environment. I was actually a direct participant when they were trying to use chronovision to capture images from the future, and they had a specific research purpose. We were trained utilizing essentially a time-space suit, not unlike a spacesuit, a NASA spacesuit, that was coated with titanium. And we also participated in some exercises in perception, in how to quickly, for example, look to the left and right and make sense of something very quickly.
Okay, and so it you know, the rabbit hole goes on and goes deeper. But thank you for drawing those interesting parallels. So we do have another question coming up here in the chat. I'm going to try to get to the questions as much as I can. Do you ever feel that you were observed by off-worlders during your missions of time travel and or jump gate usage?
I know I was. For example, sometimes when I would go out of body in the Montauk chair, and we would go sort of through what was kind of like a large elliptical tunnel. It was almost like screaming across a plane in an airplane. But at the same time, you kind of sensed that you were in this sort of elliptical or lenticular-shaped tunnel. Several times, the forward movement to my own subjective future stopped, and I looked over on the right, and there would be a pocket with gray extraterrestrials observing me. Bernie has also confirmed that they determined that there was extraterrestrial involvement in some of the time travel devices because time travelers, from our civilization were having these encounters with the Greys when they were undergoing a certain kind of time travel. And my explanation for this is that by time traveling, we were entering the fourth dimension, right? We were entering the domain that they regularly operate in. So I think it was as natural for them to observe us as, let's say, fish observe us when we scuba dive. We were entering their environment. And I can certainly state that.
Okay, so this is so wild. Andy, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay. And I have to make an announcement that there is this individual who is now posting this whole bizarre story about me on the internet. So I'm actually having a good laugh over it, but I guess other people won't think it's so funny. It's just pretty funny. I'm just going to post the link over here in the chat room. It's just a hoot. I'm sorry. This guy is saying that I'm a CIA operative in a white hat and that I was a sex slave. And oh, wow. What a trip.
Just show you the money, Carrie. I call that the Bill Clinton doctrine, which is that you're not defamed and lied about on the internet until you become consequential. I think it goes with territory.
Wow, what a trip. Okay, and I am front and center on the top of this guy's page now. So whoever this guy is, I have to say his other information is not all that accurate in my opinion either. But, I do appreciate that I ended up to have something of a positive, if you want to sort of forget the CIA association. At least he calls me a white hat. That's better than me being called what he called Bill, a reptilian shapeshifter. Oh, my God. Okay. At any rate, we've got a caller, so I'm going to take the call, Andy. And caller area code 940, you are on the air with Carrie Cassidy and Andy Basiago.
Hey there, Carrie. Hi, Andy. How are you tonight?
Hi.
God, I got a million questions I could ask you. You know, let me get my questions straight here. Andy, apparently, I get the impression that your group was highly compartmentalized, and there had to be many different projects going on at the same time. You know, with the Vatican involvement, they seem to be following a prescribed timeline with the election of the future presidents. And, you know, a couple of my other questions would be, you know, are these facilities that are doing these experiments, are they set up on particular energy spots or ley lines in the United States? And so was one on the East Coast, one on the West Coast? There could be more, I don't know. And have you gotten in contact with Michael Ralph of the Mars Record?
Interesting questions. Yeah, Project Pegasus clearly was highly compartmentalized. For example, when we met with Dr. Agnew there in 1967-68, he literally asked my father to not keep a paper trail in terms of keeping the receipts from things like restaurant tabs that would have entered government files indicating, for example, who might have been at a certain lunch in Albuquerque. It was that compartmentalized. There was clearly an emphasis in Project Pegasus to share the knowledge of the existence of these different time travel technologies with the smallest group of people, only those who had a need to know. So, for example, we were instructed to lie to our own mothers if necessary to not reveal what was going on. But I would add, though, that the Manhattan Project had something like 64,000 employees, and there wasn't a single breach of operational security during World War II about the existence of the atomic bomb that resulted from somebody breaching their security oath, their secrecy agreement. I think the Vatican involvement was part of that in the sense that after the chronovisor Vernetti and Gemelli was passed along to the United States, they were still dealing with a significant number of Catholic project principals like my father, and even I described the kids in my immediate circle were all attending a local Benedictine parish for Sunday school and for Catholic services. I think it's conspicuous that when the identity of Barry Soetoro, whom we now know as Barack Obama, came up during the Mars jump room training at College of the Siskiyous in the summer of 1980, there was also a reference that my father made possibly to myself serving as president. We don't know why he said that, whether it was a valid prediction of what the future holds or just something that he was saying sort of in moral support for his son or to encourage me to pursue high ideals. But clearly, it's the group of young people that were in our immediate training group. Many of them have gone on to illustrious lives or may very well do so. And then the issue of ley lines comes up a lot. I don't have any evidence that any of these quantum access devices required being in a particular location geomagnetically on the surface of the planet. I do know that area of New Jersey and the areas of New Mexico that we were teleporting to were selected because the U.S. government knew that they had been inhabited for centuries. North central New Jersey by the Lenape Native American tribe, and of course New Mexico had been a territory and then a state for 400 years. And Santa Fe is one of our oldest cities. So there was clearly intent in selecting north central New Jersey and Santa Fe, New Mexico, and then, of course, Sandia, New Mexico, as the nodes of the teleportation system as it was emerging, because they were concerned that if we were lost in time, there would be people there, adults that is, who could help us. So if, for example, we jumped through the teleporter in 1971 and found ourselves in Santa Fe in 1791, we were instructed to go to the sheriff or a Catholic priest or the most prosperous merchant in Santa Fe and explain that our parents had been killed migrating to New Mexico and could we be adopted into their household. So there was that kind of geographic concern, but I don't think it was geomagnetically related. I think it was related historically to the fact that those parts of the country had been inhabited for centuries. And then Michael Ralph is somebody I've communicated with via email, and he supports my disclosure efforts. And I can certainly, and I'm sure that Brett Stillings shares this opinion, we've discussed it, that Michael's longstanding account, I mean, he was really the first to come forward with his account about his experiences in the jump room, certainly fits into the developmental timeline as we understand it based on our experiences. So I regard Michael Relf as a truth teller.
Right. And then you have that adjunct story with Pat's story. I don't know if you've ever read that or not.
Now, whose story is this?
Pat's story. She was a kind of a junior cadet, naval cadet, and she had memories come alive after she read the Mars Record story of Michael Relf.
Well, that's information that hasn't reached me yet, and I'll have to look into that. I'll communicate with Michael about that. But certainly, the U.S. Navy has its fingerprints all over the time travel program, not just because of what we call the Philadelphia experiment, but because the Navy had been responsible for knowing and being able to anticipate what was over the horizon, literally the physical horizon of the ocean.
Right.
The oceans. And then after time travel emerged, it was given responsibility for knowing what was over the time horizon. And so, in fact, the Navy Department has been sort of the coordinator of a lot of these black projects. And let me mention something about the Navy connection. In 1981, in fall of 1981, I was instructed by Courtney M. Hunt of the CIA, who had done the second half of my jump room training in the San Fernando Valley, to drive down to the Long Beach Naval Station and visit the quartermaster's office. And when I did that, I was told that they needed to get a picture of me in the dress whites of a naval officer. Kerry, this in fact is new information and kind of a breaking lead. I was photographed in the dress whites of like a Navy captain. And that photograph was dropped into the Disney Pixar film Wall-E at 40 minutes and 14 seconds of the film. So back in January 2008, when I first spoke with you and Bill Ryan, I had presented my life story to ABC Disney, and now we find that when Wall-E was released on June 27th of 2008, 40 minutes into that film, there's an animated version of my naval portrait that was dropped into that animated classic that Disney produced. So
wow.
Why that was done, whether it was just a matter of convenience, that perhaps they had been communicating with the government as to whether I was for real or not, and the government passed along this Navy portrait that was in my CIA file. But in fact, the way in which I related to the U.S. Navy, which was being detailed to it unofficially, while never being officially commissioned or serving in the Navy, just simply having a photograph of myself taken in the dress whites of a naval officer, has now been dropped into an animated film by Disney. That's kind of a bizarre turn of events, but that was just established recently. I'm in possession of it.
Well, what do you think of like movies like Deja Vu and TV shows like Stargate SG-1 and Fringe depicting this technology?
Well, Fringe, in fact, has been drawing information from my presentation to ABC Disney in 2008. In fact, I'm considering a lawsuit against the producers.
Really?
Yeah. Clearly, there are actual scenes from my account that have been dropped into that television show.